When talking about jazz legends, you almost always have a list of names that come to mind. Herbie Hancock and Duke Ellington on piano, almost always making the list. You have Thelonious Monk, one of the earliest badasses in jazz, with the man smoking cigars and riding tiny tricycles on album covers. You have the likes of Pharoah Sanders and Alice Coltrane if you want to get more spiritual. And when you mention Alice Coltrane, you almost certainly have to pair her with Joe Henderson. When you're talking about other names, you cannot leave out Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald, arguably two of the biggest names in early jazz and arguably the best duo in jazz history. When you mention queens of jazz, the likes of Nina Simone cannot be left out for her outstanding contributions to vocal jazz. And with vocal jazz, we've also got Frank Sinatra, arguably the greatest voice to ever have lived. And with that, we cannot leave out the influence and the absolute sheer magnitude of John Coltrane. And we've also got the guitarists like Wes Montgomery and John McLaughlin, who are legends of their fields. But of all the names that I mentioned and all the names that I've left out, one of them, in my opinion, towers above the rest. The Prince of Darkness, Miles Davis. When you talk about Miles Davis, you almost certainly know that there's an era of, yes, top 3 of all time. There is Babe Ruth-like status that you have with this man, where even if you do not consider him one of the greatest of all time, he's up there, and you cannot deny he is up there. With the best-selling jazz album of all time, Kind of Blue, you have to. It'd be like leaving out Hammering Hank in the conversation for best home run hitters. With an unrivaled dominance in the field, stretching double my lifetime as of right now, there is just so much Miles Davis material that anybody would have to be crazy to try and cover it all and to make sense of it all and where this man has gone, where he's been, and sadly after his death, where our music and the archives he's left behind can take him. Well, your crazy son of a bitch Ferris decided to do that. I decided to listen to every single Miles Davis project that I could. I will not get to all of them. I do not have time to listen to basically collections of albums. A lot of his 10-inch records were thrown together into sets by Columbia Records and repackaged. I'm not gonna listen to that because I listened to all of the 10-inch records by themselves, so you've got a little bit more content with that. Now, that being said, a little more content is a little bit less because these earliest Miles Davis albums up to Volume 1, I was not a big jazz aficionado. I didn't really understand a lot of it, I didn't really comprehend a lot of it, and a lot of it sounded samey and boring to me. That being said, you have the insight of a person who is just getting into jazz, and I think that my journey in discovering Miles Davis's discography will help me grow as a person and help me grow as a jazz listener and as a music listener in general. And I feel I wanted to share my experience with the rest of the world. So, without further ado, I decided to listen to Miles Davis's entire discography. I am insane. Miles Davis started off his career very fucking young, like 13 years old young. He was out there playing in the streets, playing in other bands with established jazz musicians by the time he could enter into high school. It was a different time back then. One of the things that really intrigues me about jazz is just how you get into it. There is an unparalleled sense of community in the jazz field, which is a high entry wall to get in, but once you're in, you're in. I'm assuming that a good majority of anybody who watches this will have also seen Whiplash at some point or another. And while not jazz instructors who act like that, it will often be the band leaders who do. They will strive for perfection, oftentimes not allowing other members to work by themselves and to work in other groups and restraining them to a single quartet led by a single band leader. Miles Davis did that, but he also produced some of the most kick-ass music we'll ever hear. And it did not take him long to find success. Signing to Prestige Records, Miles Davis released a handful of 10-inch records albums, of which I only was able to get my hands on 2. The New Sounds by Miles Davis was, in retrospect, pretty fucking good. At the time when I wrote my review, I thought it was just your standard typical jazz. I was dumb. Like, really dumb. It's insane. I gave Only a Paper Moon like an average. Like, that's not average. That's a really good song. Mild Flame, it's pretty alright. Dig is pretty damn good. Conception was alright, and it makes its way onto a future compilation. A lot of Miles Davis's earliest material is oftentimes reworking of itself. I did not realize this. I can guide myself and say these songs are really good. If you want to get into any of Miles Davis's older materials, a lot of these songs appear on compilations of his earliest works. Go and listen to those if you want to hear it. And I definitely recommend the 4 songs I just listed. The second of his 10-inch EPs that, or not EPs, 10-inch LPs that I reviewed, Blue Period, a classic. Like, this is one of those things where it's like, we've officially kind of hit a stride. This project is really weird for me because I really enjoyed it on first listen, which is the only one of the earliest records that was before Volume 1 that I really enjoyed. This is also one of my favorite realizations as a music listener, because Blue Period taught me something that I didn't necessarily understand at the time, and that jazz isn't just soloing. It's not just somebody doing a bunch of random notes and then passing it off to somebody else who plays some more random notes and passing it off to the drummer who plays more random notes. But it's about a whole, and yes, there is soloing in there, and yes, sometimes it can be a bit gratuitous, but Miles Davis really knocked it out of the park with Blue Period. Now, Bluing, that one's phenomenal. Just great. I loved it. Every single part of it. Blue Room is the weakest link of the tracks, although that's a bit of a misleading statement because there are a lot of takes of Blue Room that are sprinkled throughout his career, especially on his works that were published after his death, which have a wide variety of alternate takes. And in those alternate takes, you can hear a development of the band's chemistry, and they really improve upon a lot of the performances that were done in this original recording. Out of the Blue is just out of this world, in my opinion. It is easily one of the top songs that I've come back to in this era of Miles Davis. Phenomenal from front to back. I loved every single part of it. Now, blue is a reoccurring theme in jazz music, and whether it be nods to the blues, the blue note in Tokyo, Blue Room, there's a lot of blue symbolism in jazz music. I will do some research that will appear in the second video of this series, but I think that the Blue Period demonstrates the first and definitely not the last delve through blue that Miles Davis will occur. Through each one of his necessarily blue albums, I would say, you get sort of a reinvention of Miles Davis. And this, I guess you could take as the invention of Miles Davis, as we really see him as a full figure on this very short, I don't even know if you could consider an album. It builds a foundation for his career that has been spawned out of this New York scene since the 1940s, and now it's all culminating together. And I don't think he's earned the moniker just yet, but this project brought him pretty damn close, and I'm excited to see where he goes from here. And now, sadly, I was not able to get my hands on the third of the 10-inch projects that Miles Davis did. But continuing on our theme of blue, we have Blue Moods. This one isn't good. I'm sorry. This is 0 out of 10. Needs more blue. It's boring and it's forgettable. And despite it being 26 minutes, I never return to any of these tracks. And maybe I ought to give it another chance, but it's like I remember being so bored by it on first listen, even after Blue Room, where I had kind of picked up on the chemistry between the band members. This one just doesn't really sound all that good. It's just boring. That's all I can really say about it, to be honest. Now, now. At Last is probably the first live album we could have had of Miles Davis had the recording space and technology been around in 1953. This is the first full-length LP that he could have released as a live album. The Lighthouse is a famous venue in Corona Beach. Forgive me if I'm wrong, in California. It was a notorious jazz place of playing and of being, and it was one of the best live settings early on in, I would consider, a jazz revolution in the 50s. And now, this is also one of my favorite album covers because it shows just how fucking white all of these fits are. It looks ridiculous, but it's also the 50s. I love this. It shows that Miles Davis is not this egocentric superstar, at least at this point. And I'm not saying that he will be, but not everything revolves around him. He actually takes a complimentary role and backs up the Lighthouse All-Stars. This album is great, and the story behind it almost parallels just how good the music is. I think that this version of Round Midnight is arguably one of the best. A Night in Tunisia, so good. Infinity Promenade, awesome. Drum Conversation is one of the best drum solos in early jazz, and At Last is a great way to close it out. It's one of the most well-rounded early recordings, and it has insane quality too, considering it was recorded in 1953 on what I assume is an 8-track, maybe even a 4-track recording machine, if that. And it shows that Miles Davis is already on the cutting edge. Despite being such a young man, he has already gotten this far. And on the album cover, you can see the only thing they were recording with was like 2 overhead mics and a mic in between each of the band members. There was not ideal recording for sound, but yet it still sounds decent, and I love that about this album. It's great. And there's one album later on, like way later on, that was released in the 70s and has full sound recording, so you'll be able to hear my Mersbo comparisons when we get to that one. But for now, At Last, one of his best early material. Now we've gotten to probably one of the first kind of realer reviews on this thing. The Musings of Miles is alright. For a debut full-length album, it's alright. At Last was far more ambitious, but that was also a live album, and it wasn't able to be released until the 80s. I don't think he's quite gotten to the point where he's able to fully adopt the moniker that he will adopt, but right now, you can see that he's starting to be able to take hold of the band and drive the band in directions that he wants to go. This is probably the first showing, I would say, that Miles Davis establishes that he is the band leader above all else. I think that once we've gotten to Volume 1, we really start to hit our stride. I think that this is the beginning of where we call Miles Davis Miles Davis. Of course, you have the 10-inch records that came before this, and you had the Musings of Miles, but I think this is where we can definitively say, this is Miles Davis. And these are compilations of previous sessions that had bore fruit that landed on those 10-inch records. The issue is, those were 10-inch glass records. These are full 12-inch LPs. Now, there are technically 3 versions of these volumes. Volume 1, Volume 2, and an alternate Volume 2. I'm only going to be covering Volume 1 and 2, and excluding the alternate Volume 2 for the sake of brevity. Volume 2 will come at a later date. Now, all of the recordings that take place on both Volume 1 and 2 are sessions that were taken over the course of 3 years. These sessions bore fruit and are the entirety of the Blue Note output, with the exception of the Columbia sessions that were with the artist Cannonball Adderley, which resulted in the album Something Else being released in 1958. Also, many of these songs are familiar standards that kind of adopted a new name and would be re-recorded in the following years and released under different names. For example, Takeoff, which is actually Deception from The Birth of Cool Sessions, and Weirdo being redone as Walkin', and later as Sid's Ahead. We kick off this compilation with Tempest Fugit. It has some really nice drum grooves throughout from Art Blakey, and it actually has a really explosive drum solo from him. It's got a real pots and pans kind of Meg White sound to it. You also got Jimmy Heath on tenor saxophone, who accompanies Miles Davis extremely well, as does his brother Percy. And you can really see the band's chemistry kind of come together fully on this song, and it plays a real key piece of what makes it good. And actually what I think this is probably the song I return to the most on this compilation. While Tempest Fugit was a Miles Davis showcase through and through, Killo is a more collaborative effort from the quartet. They play phenomenally. Jill Coggins joining in on piano and providing excellent vibes to just really complete the track and give it a nice whole sound. And he even has a tiny little feature at the end with Jimmy and Miles giving some soloing time and providing him just a little bit of time to do his little thing. And Jimmy actually blows Miles out of the water on this song, in terms of soloing at least. That's because this tenor sax has so much soul poured into it, you think it was a thing from Hollow Knight. Now, the third track, Enigma, is a slow burner. It has a true kind of hard bop sound to it with a lot slower of a tempo and some really kind of bluesy tones from Miles Davis. The track is basically a long Miles Davis solo. It has a Vince it has a Vince Guaraldi trio sound to it, and for those who don't know, he's the guy that did Charlie Brown Christmas with the Peanuts comics. It has a kind of tone to it with a piano and trumpet being a nice large focus and the other instruments giving kind of a warm sound to it. Ray's idea is a lot bouncier from the get-go, and I loved it for a really good bit. It's basically a large talent show with a lot of guests, and the band picked up some new faces, and the most noticeable one for me was the different drummer, Kenny Clark. He has some large bombastic fills between the solos, which leads to one of my favorite moments on the entire compilation, and the exploding just drum roll that leads into Jackie McLean's alto solo. And then when everything strips back for the piano to finally grab the show before coming right back in and giving the nice motif of the song, it's pure ear candy for me. But this is also where my troubles with early stylings of jazz come in. I got ADHD. The album is just about to lose me. But the first track I do remember disliking was How Deep is the Ocean, and its monotonous pacing. There's really only Miles Davis and who I assume Coggins and Blakey, I guess, are there to support it. But the song, it needed to be 2 minutes shorter from its 4.5 minute runtime, and unlike the slow burner Enigma, you don't got no tempo changes and no bluesy tones. It's like, it's a nothing burger, and it's the musical equivalent to a sad job in my opinion. It's just not enthusiastic at all in the slightest. And then here is an example of what we like to call filler. We have CTA and CTA alternate master. I don't like the original version, surprisingly enough. It's the alternate master which sweeps it away in every single department. I hate the alternate version too. The one thing I can say is that I do like the scrappier sound with Jay Johnson doing some fucking bonkers stuff with the trombone, really outshining Miles Davis here. God, the solo that Miles Davis has, that's fucking atrocious. It was these really fast, high note solos that, like, just spewing of random notes, and it really kills the entire energy of what was up to that point kind of a rhythmy song. And next we have a Swedish folk tune. Hedvig, if you're out there and you're watching, this one's for you. It's called Dear Old Stockholm. Miles Davis plays so smooth with his crooning, it goes up and down the register with ease. I don't want to say best jazz, but it's the best jazz that Miles Davis has shown so far in his early output, and Jackie Jackie on alto is just so smooth with it, and he's able to keep up with Miles. That being said, I know recording technology was not the best this time, but the drums and the piano are so insanely low in the mix. It's due to all the miking in the room. I can guarantee you that. As somebody who studies sound engineering, yes, it was due to the miking. And the sax solo that is in this song is pretty out of place. Kind of destroys the vibe of the track. However, before that, it isn't a bad song. It's actually pretty good. But after that, it isn't a bad song. But it's also not something I would go out of my way to listen to, simply for the production and the questionable choice of soloing. So we were on a cold streak with a lot of the tracks, and to be honest, I got extremely disinterested in the whole thing. I was actually questioning if I should even continue with the Miles Davis discog, despite knowing what albums lie just around the corner. But then we got to chance it, and holy baloney, Batman, this thing fucking rules. I don't know what they were smoking in the room to make this, but god damn, it starts off with this kind of Bond theme sound in the beginning, and it really intrigues you from the get-go. Miles Davis in his solos leaves no room from the breaks, going from 100 miles per hour to 200, and JJ just continues to jazz shredfest with an insane solo. Ultimately, it's one of my favorite songs from before 1956. That all went to waste with Yesterday's. Not a good song at all. I fell asleep in my chair listening to it. I've done that before, but I mean this in a derogatory manner. It's not a good song. After that, we're graced with an alternate take of the track Donna. This is one of the most obvious reasons that we do have alternate takes, because I assume it's an earlier take of the song, where we have the track Donna that's hidden in there, but it's not quite nailed to the level that it is on the full master of the song. The chemistry is there with JJ and Jackie both having some incredible solos with insane amount of grace and feel, and Miles is finally learning a slower approach that he would use to a mastery in a silent way and toning it down. But despite that, he does some random 16th note triplets that are just kind of, what the fuck are you doing, man? It doesn't make any sense. And the song was finished, and one day it will be enjoyed by me. And it wasn't ruined in the same way CTA was, which I found cool. At this point in my review, I was up to like 1,241 words, and I was like, holy shit. And then I realized this is one of the weaker showings. I've got to do the whole plugged nickel showcase. Like, what the fuck, man? That's insane. When we got to that point, we got to the Woody and You alternate take, and it isn't good. I think Stockholm Syndrome got to me, and I just kind of forgot that the track was there and just accepted it into the album. It's just another solo fest and drums, and just, I didn't really have any feelings to it one way or another. And in my opinion, that is worse than having bad music that you can actually pick apart. I'd rather feel passionately negative about something than have something passively neutral, because at least I'd have something to say besides stuffing burger. And man, we are feasting on some bread, because there's nothing in between that track. But overall, as a whole, the album was solid. I deeply, deeply appreciate that we're able to have this as a showcase of what was actually happening in Miles Davis's early careers, to where we don't have to go and buy a Parlophone just so we can play 10-inch records. I hope that Volume 2 is a little more interesting. I enjoyed a lot of the cuts off this compilation, but none of them really stood out to me as much as Chance It, the alternate take of Donna, and Kello. I love those ones. I think that this is essential if you want to get into Davis. Despite all the negatives I've had to say about it, somebody who wants to get into Davis and who already understands jazz a little bit will get a lot out of this album. It's going to be a little bit before I get to another Miles Davis review. This is sort of a big push to kind of test the waters and to get something to my editor, another thing. But this is going to be the style going forward of reviews, and this is going to be my showcase and my channel. So anyways, my name is Ferris, and until next time, just keep on trucking. That the band has on this track, and it plays a key part throughout the compilation. Oh, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me. You're kidding me. I fucking hell.